Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Well, I think, I heard thunder earlier as I was walking on the trail. I thought maybe that there would be a storm this evening. I was sort of hoping for it. I thought, all the sounds and maybe even a little lightning would just be such a wonderful thing to experience during Zazen, but the sky cleared and it's just calm out, and I feel like the same thing sort of happened to me. I'd sort of thought that I would come. My intention was to talk about anger, but just sitting here in this place with your deep practice, it just sort of evaporated, I think. This sort of thing that I wanted to hold and talk about. I think that is sort of exactly what this bodhisattva work is. So maybe not everybody is familiar with this term bodhisattva, but it's sort of an emergent idea in Buddhism. Sort of the first wave of Buddhists really held this sort of archetype of the Buddha as what practitioners were, may I say, aspiring for. But as Buddhism developed and turned into Mahayana, there was this idea of bodhisattva that was developed. And some would say it's sort of the transition from having a singular enlightenment idea to a more collective enlightenment idea. And so the idea of the bodhisattva holds the idea that everyone is crossing the shore together. And so we all become enlightened together. And so even this conception that one person could be enlightened by themselves kind of was abandoned. I think appropriately so. And so in this idea of the bodhisattva archetype, we come to this place and we experience awakening. And we have to then bring it to the world. We have to go to the places where it is not. I've wanted to talk about anger. As our teacher has been away, I've been giving these talks, and this is my third and last one for a while, and I've sort of been keeping this theme of questions going. I think anger is sort of my question. There was an evening several weeks ago where we kind of collectively went around and we all drew a question from a hat. And it was sort of pointed out to me by our teacher after the fact that we sort of all, in this very kind of synchronistic way, got our question. And that was the question that I had drawn from the hat, is what do you do with anger? And as I've been exploring it, it becomes a very complex thing. Definitely not anything I have an answer to. It's just my question. I think anger is sort of an unusual thing, at least as far as I can tell, for Buddhists to talk about. There's a saying that's attributed to the Buddha that having anger is like swallowing poison and hoping it harms the other person, which I think has a lot of truth in the sentiment. That anger is actually this very volatile thing for ourselves that sort of erodes us in ways that aren't exactly obvious. I think that that's true to a sense. But I think anger is also this vital emotion that exists for a reason. I think that if anger was so toxic, it wouldn't have just lasted through evolutionary time. It's actually highly mobilizing. It's sort of this feeling in you that resonates the sense that something's not right and needs change. That there's an injustice going on. I think anger is actually quite useful. Hatred is a little different than anger, but I'm very inspired by the sentiment of Kurt Vonnegut. He said that hatred beats pure cocaine any day. That if you really wanted to go out and just really get things done, I mean, it's the fuel. And I think that he really channeled his own hatred towards injustice as the impetus for his great humanitarian work. I think anger can sort of function this way. That we're not really, as Buddhists, blaming anyone. Buddhism is, I think, a very explicitly and very profoundly a known blame way of living in the world. There's no reason to blame anyone. Not just for philosophical reasons, but it's actually not really that useful to blame anyone. Not that we don't hold people accountable, that's quite different. But I think that we can have anger at injustice. I think that that's actually quite salient thing in these times. But we've been having this theme of questions. And so this is kind of mine. And as I've been exploring it, I realize as I open it up, there's just more and more questions. I know a Episcopalian who's somewhat of a mentor of mine, who has traveled to the Middle East and met religious figures in Islam, who he's become quite close with. And he has got the privilege of knowing a little bit about Islam from them. And he has become captivated by this idea of jihad. He believes it's one of the most sophisticated religious constructs that humans have developed. And it's the idea of struggle. And what's tragic about this idea of jihad is it is one of the most severe instances of cultural misappropriation. How our media has turned it into this thing to villainize a whole culture and way of life. And granted, there are fundamentalists in Islam, just as there are fundamentalists, or I should probably say radicals, in every religion. And radicalism is, I think, innately problematic. But this idea of jihad, of the struggle, is, I think, compellingly beautiful. And so, as this person who met these Muslim teachers learned, is that in the teaching of Islam, to blow yourself up is to end the struggle. It is the opposite of jihad. I find this profound. This idea of keeping the struggle going for the struggle's sake. And that it's sort of the exact thing that makes us grow. I think just in an evolutionary sense, in a personal, in a spiritual sense, it's the struggle that's so important. I think having a question is sort of a microcosm of a struggle. Maybe it's sort of the baseline of a struggle. Maybe as we enter questions more deeply, the struggle just intensifies and splinters off into this sort of radical doubt that I think is beautiful and compelling. So as I kind of explored this idea of anger and just sort of where our times are and what it means to be a Buddhist at this time, I sort of found it odd that I was contemplating anger, and I came to this evening with this intention of talking about this and sitting zazen here in its depth and going through ceremony and chanting the Heart Sutra. It's where does anger fit into that? I mean, where does anger fit into emptiness? Where does anger fit into the awakened mind? What would Buddha say about today? What would Shakyamuni say? And sort of as I followed down this question, this idea of Mappo came up again for me. And I do think about Mappo from time to time. Mappo is the prophecy of the early Buddhists. So Mappo is, I think, unique. I think Buddhism is unique in this, in that it had its prophecy of its own demise. I think other religious traditions tend to prophesy, some return or promised land or some fulfillment. But Buddhism has always been holding the belief that the awakened mind would decline through the ages and would come to a period of Mappo. And Mappo is where the teaching is it's not really in the collective population, but that the traditions are held and the way is maintained by the bodhisattvas, who carry it to the time of the next Buddha's awakening. And so I think I've been fighting this idea as a Buddhist for years, wanting to prove that it's not true, wanting to defy kind of this sort of gloomy prognosis. But as I've been exploring anger and this nature of questions, it sort of raised another question for me. What if we embraced Mappo as Buddhists? What would that look like? What would that mean? I don't think the world needs more crusaders. I don't think the world needs people who, with certainty, have that thing in their mind that they know needs to be manifested or that other people should do. I think in some way we're moving beyond that and the need for that. I don't think we actually need certainty so much. I think holding doubt and questions and the willingness to struggle is just so profoundly beautiful to me. And I think, in a sense, exactly what our society needs. I think in an odd way, we would call this empathy. I think empathy is sort of the willingness to be with people where they are and to be able to locate their experience within yourself. To have this reciprocity, this understanding. And so empathy isn't this, oh, I know what you should do, or I know maybe that, you are in some plight, but at least at least you have this. It's not this trying to convince someone that their feelings are somehow off. It's this willingness to be with them. I think that this is very close to the bodhisattva mentality of just being in your times, of resonating with them, for allowing them without control. We need bodhisattvas now. Maybe more than Buddhas. Maybe Mappo is not really the decline, but the natural progression. I think this willingness to just allow this hardship that's in the air. I mean, we come to this place and we sit zazen in this way. And it does, I think, evaporate all, but it's still in the air we breathe. It's still here. It's still in this room. We never leave it. It is, I think, the reality of our condition and what it is we are now tasked with accepting. Maybe you have some questions. I mean, are we like the bodhisattvas enough to be willing to struggle? I think that's maybe another sort of uniqueness of Zen practice, is we don't come as if to a church where we sit, once a week and we listen to some sermon and we go home. I mean, that's not what Zen practice is. I mean, to be here is to be engaged. No one can practice for you. I think it's such an incredible time to be alive in what we're learning about just how the mind operates. And I think it's just compelling to know how much we hide from ourselves. How much we can hide from anger. I mean, anger is just this thing that can just be so present, but just so subtle, it's not really seen. I mean, so many things exist this way. But when you sit and you face that wall, I mean, you are the only thing you are looking through. I mean, no one holds the key to awakening for you. I think Buddhism is sort of innately attuned to this idea of struggle. I mean, we talk about ending suffering. And I think that that's a struggle to do. Are there any questions?
I liked your description of anger early on in the talk. I could certainly relate with that. It's something I've been feeling for quite a while, and also trying to sort out the whys and wherefores of that. What is the source of that anger, and also what to do with it, because it is a kind of poison, my own personal poison. So I don't have any answers, but I could certainly relate to what you're saying.
I think in this time, in this society, a lot of men are very angry. I don't think we know exactly why. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's really no place for it to go.
That is the feeling I have. It's like, how do I... And I should be clear, my anger, I mean, it's not with any particular person. It's really with how things are in a general sense. And where they seem to be going, where we... It's a kind of maddening... I don't know how to explain it. I feel like I'm watching my society cut its own throat. And it appears that no amount of information or logic or reason or scientific whatever is effective. That's what's maddening to me. That's what makes me angry, is that how can we knowingly continue down the path that we're going? And I don't know what to do with that. I mean, I feel it. I wake up in the morning and it's there. I've tried abstaining from the news, from reading, from, various things, but it's the sense of helplessness in the face of it all that really is maddening to me, and it angers me, because my impulse is, okay, what can I do? What do we do? How do we fix this? How do we change course? And it's not something I have any control over. So
It's almost like we're all being collectively led to slaughter, but yet being so passive and calm about it. But maybe it's anger that's sort of urging us to not be helpless, because we aren't. I mean, we live in the world, we do affect it.
I mean, I try in small ways to do things, to change my certain behaviors, how I use water, things like that. Recycling, but yeah, it's a crazy maker.
Well, I hope you sit with this
I do every day, yes.
and open up. I think it exists, all things have their function.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a matter of like opening up to it is, I think, a big part of finding that function for it in your life.
It's difficult to be with, and I mean, as you alluded in your talk, it really colors everything. That's what I've noticed recently. If I look objectively at my circumstances, there's nothing to be angry about. My life is really nice, actually. I love the people that I, am with. Yeah. So it's this weird. Anyway, I'll figure it out.
Well, I'm reminded of Edo-san's teaching about the stew.
About what?
The stew. Because I think in some way we're all, in some sense, in a collective mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I think anger is just a part of our time that we're just in, that sort of colors all of us. I don't think it's just your anger.
Mm.
I can relate quite easily with, and I think that a lot of people, if not most people, in our country and even in the world are struggling with the same sorts of feelings of anger and powerlessness and what do I do, and I mean, I had the same conversation almost word for word with my daughter and son-in-law in the last few weeks when I was visiting them, and it's that feeling of helplessness because I'm only looking at one thing or maybe particular things that I feel are unjust and I don't know how to fix that. And for me, the only way to continue my life is to open it up wider than that. I may not be able to do this particular thing, but there are other things that not only can I do, but I'm already doing. I mean, if you just look at your activities throughout the day.
Mhm.
And the wonderful thing that I heard in your talk for me is the acceptance of struggle. That that's where it's a necessary struggle. And it's good to struggle, I think.
I think that there is this dynamic that I think anger is this appropriate thing that urges us to engage the world. It's sort of what allows us to see that something needs changing. But at the same time, I mean, it's just so profound to be with this. To just be with people experiencing anger and just to allow that without fixing it. Or to just sort of know what should happen next. I think this willingness to share it's not nothing. I think it in and of itself is the bodhisattva work, I think.
How do you find your sense of anger? I feel like kind of grown desensitized to it.
I think I am desensitized to it very often myself. I don't think I like to feel my anger. I think it's sort of like that idea that we hide from ourselves. It's just one of the incredible things that our minds do. And I think that this is one of the things that I really hide from myself a lot. And I think sort of sometimes I come up against it and I just have it for a moment and then it just sort of fades and I go about my life. But I think it rears its head sometimes. It reared its head, I think, yesterday. And I just didn't want it to just fade away again. Because I know I get the sense that it's not really going away. I'm just not paying attention to it. So no, I think I share this sense of desensitization, but I think it will rear its head and I think you'll see where it is in your life, maybe just in a flash, in a moment. And then it's that choice of how much you're going to engage it. Or if you're just going to let it kind of fade away again. And I think if you look for it too, it'll help you find it again. If that's what you want.